A billionaire CEO stands frozen at his ex-wife's grave when two little girls, crying, they suddenly recognize him, revealing a heartbreaking secret. Follow now, or the algorithm might hide us forever. Your comments and shares keep us alive. Don't risk it. Let's begin the story. The morning mist clung to Greenwood Cemetery like a shroud, wrapping around weathered headstones and ancient oak trees. Alexander Kane, 34 years old and worth more than most small countries, walked slowly down the cobblestone path, his Italian leather shoes making soft clicking sounds against the damp stones. The designer black suit he wore seemed too heavy for his shoulders, weighted down by grief that had settled into his bones over the past 6 months. He carried a bouquet of white lilies, Isabella's favorites, their pristine petals a stark contrast to the grey October sky overhead. The cemetery was nearly empty at this early hour, just how he preferred it. No curious stares, no whispered recognition of his face from business magazines, no awkward condolences from strangers who thought they understood his loss. Alexander approached the elegant marble headstone that bore his wife's name, Isabella Marie Kane, beloved wife, taken too soon. The inscription seemed inadequate for the woman who had been his everything, his anchor in a world of corporate sharks and endless board meetings. She had been the light that made his vast empire feel meaningful, the warmth that turned his cold penthouse into a home. Kneeling on the soft grass, he placed the lilies against the headstone with trembling fingers. "Hey, beautiful," he whispered, his voice cracking despite his attempts to stay strong. "I know I said I'd try to move on, but it's harder than I thought. The house feels like a mausoleum without your laugh echoing through the halls." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves above him, and for a moment he could almost imagine it was Isabella's gentle touch on his cheek. He closed his eyes, letting the familiar ache wash over him. The doctors had said it was a freak accident, a blood clot that traveled to her brain while she was sleeping. One moment she was there, planning their weekend getaway to the vineyard. The next, she was gone forever. "The company's doing well," he continued, speaking to the marble as if she could hear him. "We just acquired that tech startup you were excited about, the one that develops educational apps for underprivileged kids. I thought you'd want to know." His voice grew softer. "I'm trying to honor your memory through the foundation, but nothing feels right without you there to guide me." A sound caught his attention, a soft sniffling that didn't belong to his own grief. Alexander looked up, scanning the cemetery grounds, and his breath caught in his throat. About 50 yards away, near a cluster of older headstones, he saw two small figures huddled together on the ground. They were children, impossibly young to be alone in this place of sorrow. As he stood and moved closer, his heart clenched. They were little girls, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with tangled blonde hair that caught what little sunlight filtered through the clouds. Their clothes were dirty and torn, as if they'd been living rough for days. The twins, for they were unmistakably identical, sat beside a simple granite marker, their tiny arms wrapped around each other as they cried with the devastating intensity that only children could manage. Their sobs echoed through the cemetery, a heartbreaking symphony of loss that made Alexander's own grief feel suddenly selfish. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten them. As he got closer, he could see that their faces were streaked with dirt and tears, their cheeks hollow with hunger. What kind of monsters would abandon children in a cemetery? His protective instincts, dulled by months of his own pain, suddenly roared to life. "Hey there," he said softly, crouching down several feet away so he wouldn't tower over them. "Are you girls okay? Where are your parents?" Both children looked up simultaneously, and Alexander's world tilted on its axis. Their eyes, a striking emerald green that seemed to glow even through their tears, were achingly familiar. They were Isabella's eyes, the same rare shade that had captivated him from the moment they first met at that charity gala 7 years ago. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The moment the twins saw his face, their crying stopped abruptly. They stared at him with a mixture of wonder, recognition, and something that looked almost like relief. The girl on the left, slightly taller by perhaps an inch, wiped her nose with the back of her small hand. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Is it really you?" Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. The world seemed to spin around him as he stared at these two little girls who had just called him the one thing he'd never been, never could be. Isabella had been unable to have children. The doctors had been clear about that after years of trying and countless medical procedures. "I think there's been a mistake," he said carefully, his voice shaking. "I'm not your father, sweetheart. My name is Alexander Kane, and I don't have any children." The second twin, who had been silent until now, stood up on unsteady legs. Her emerald eyes never left his face as she took a tentative step forward. "You're lying," she said, with the brutal honesty that only children possessed. "Mommy showed us pictures of you every night before bed. She said you were our daddy and that someday we'd all be together again." Alexander's hands began to tremble. This was impossible. Isabella would never have hidden something like this from him. They had shared everything, their dreams, their fears, their desperate desire for a family. She had cried in his arms after every failed pregnancy test, every devastating conversation with fertility specialists. "What was your mother's name?" he asked, though part of him already dreaded the answer. "Isabella," both girls said in unison, and Alexander felt his knees hit the cold ground. The taller twin continued, her small voice growing stronger. "Isabella Marie Kane. She used to sing us lullabies and tell us stories about our daddy who lived in a big building that touched the clouds. She said he was the kindest man in the world, but that bad people were trying to hurt us, so we had to stay hidden." Alexander's mind reeled. Hidden? From whom? And why? Nothing made sense. He stared at these two little girls who claimed to be his daughters, searching their faces for answers he wasn't sure he wanted to find. "When did you last see your mother?" he managed to ask. The smaller twin's lower lip began to quiver again. 3 days ago. Some scary men came to our house and Mommy told us to hide in the secret room. We heard lots of shouting and then—" She dissolved into fresh tears, unable to continue. Her sister wrapped protective arms around her. "Then everything got quiet. When we came out, Mommy was gone and there was blood on the floor. We've been hiding ever since, but we got hungry and scared, so we came here to find Mommy's grave. The nice lady at the flower shop told us where it was." Alexander felt the world spinning out of control. Blood, scary men. His wife, if these children were telling the truth, hadn't died of a blood clot at all. She had been murdered, and these two little girls had witnessed it. But how was any of this possible? He had identified Isabella's body himself, had sat by her hospital bed after the doctors pronounced her brain dead from the clot, unless— "Girls," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "show me where your mother is buried." Hand in hand, the twins led him deeper into the cemetery, past sections he'd never explored. They stopped at a modest granite headstone that read simply, "Isabella M. Johnson, loving mother, rest in peace." Alexander stared at the grave in shock. Johnson was Isabella's maiden name, the name she'd used before they were married, but this meant— "How long has your mother been gone?" he asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer would shatter what remained of his world. 6 months and 3 days, the taller twin said, with the precision that only a grieving child could manage. She died the same day as the lady on TV with the same name. We thought it was funny that they had the same name and died on the same day. But Mommy said it wasn't funny at all. She got really scared and said we might have to leave soon. Alexander's blood turned to ice. 6 months and 3 days ago was exactly when his Isabella had died. Same name, same day, same impossible circumstances, but his wife had died in their penthouse bedroom, not wherever these children had been hidden. As he stared at the headstone, a terrible possibility began to form in his mind. What if there had been two Isabellas? What if his wife had been living a double life, maintaining two separate identities for reasons he couldn't begin to fathom? The smaller twin tugged on his expensive suit jacket. "Daddy, are you going to take care of us now? We've been so scared and we're really hungry. Mommy always said that if something happened to her, we should find you and you'd keep us safe." Alexander looked down at these two little girls, who might be his daughters, their emerald eyes so achingly familiar, their faith in him so complete despite being strangers. If they were telling the truth, then everything he thought he knew about his life, his marriage, and his wife's death was a lie. But as he stared into those eyes that were so unmistakably Isabella's, he realized that the truth of their parentage mattered less than their immediate need. These children were alone, frightened and hungry. Whatever secrets had led to this moment, whatever lies had been told or truths hidden, these little girls needed protection. And something deep in his chest, some instinct he'd never felt before, was already claiming them as his own. "What are your names?" he asked gently. "I'm Emma," said the taller twin, "and this is my sister Lily. We're 6 years old, and we know how to read and write and do math up to 100. Mommy taught us everything because we couldn't go to regular school." "Why couldn't you go to school?" Alexander asked, though he suspected the answer would only deepen the mystery. Emma's expression grew serious beyond her years. "Because of the bad men who were looking for us. Mommy said they wanted to hurt us to get to our daddy. She said our daddy was very important and had lots of money, so bad people might try to use us against him." Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. Kidnapping threats weren't uncommon for someone of his wealth and status, but he'd always been careful about security. If Isabella had been protecting his children, their children, by keeping them hidden, then what kind of danger had they all been in? "Emma, Lily," he said, making a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe. We need to figure out what happened to your mother and make sure those bad men can't hurt you anymore." Both girls nodded solemnly, their small hands finding his larger ones with a trust that both humbled and terrified him. As they walked back toward the cemetery entrance, Alexander's mind raced with questions and implications. If these were his daughters, how had Isabella hidden an entire pregnancy from him? When had she given birth? And most importantly, who had killed her and why? But as Emma's small fingers squeezed his hand and Lily leaned against his side, Alexander realized that the questions could wait. Right now, these children needed food, safety, and care. Everything else, the truth about Isabella's double life, the circumstances of her death, the identity of the men who had terrorized his daughters, would have to be unraveled piece by piece. What he did know, with absolute certainty, was that his life had just changed forever. 3 hours ago, he had been a grieving widower with nothing left to live for. Now, he was possibly a father to 2 little girls who needed him more than his company, his money, or his empire ever could. As they reached his black Bentley, Alexander helped the twins into the back seat, their wide eyes taking in the luxury that surrounded them. But what struck him most wasn't their awe at the expensive car. It was how quickly they settled in, as if they belonged there, as if they had always belonged with him. The drive to his penthouse was quiet, except for the soft whispers between the twins. Alexander caught glimpses of them in the rearview mirror, these 2 little girls who had appeared in his life like characters from a dream. They looked so much like Isabella that his chest ached, but there was something else in their faces, a strength and resilience that spoke of hardships no child should endure. When they pulled up to Kane Tower, the twins pressed their faces to the windows, staring up at the gleaming skyscraper that housed both his company headquarters and his private residence on the top floors. "Is this really where you live, Daddy?" Lily asked in wonder. The word "daddy" still sent shockwaves through Alexander's system, but he was beginning to accept that whether or not these children were biologically his, they had chosen him as their father. And perhaps, after 6 months of devastating loneliness, he needed them just as much as they needed him. "Yes," he said simply. "And if you girls want, it can be your home too." For the first time since he'd found them crying in the cemetery, both twins smiled. They were small, tentative smiles, but they transformed their tear-stained faces into something beautiful and hopeful. As the elevator carried them up to the penthouse, Alexander made a silent promise to Isabella, whichever Isabella these children had known and lost. He would protect Emma and Lily with his life. He would uncover the truth about what had happened, and he would make sure that whoever had taken their mother away from them would pay for their crimes. The elevator doors opened to reveal his sprawling penthouse, and Alexander watched as the twins stepped into their new world with wonder and trepidation. Whatever secrets were waiting to be discovered, whatever dangers might still be lurking, one thing was certain. The Kane family had just grown by 2, and Alexander would move heaven and earth to keep it that way. But as Emma and Lily explored their new home, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that finding them was only the beginning. Someone had killed Isabella, and those same people might still be hunting for these children. The game, whatever it was far from over. The penthouse felt different, with children's voices echoing through rooms that had known only silence for months. Alexander watched from the kitchen doorway as Emma and Lily stood in the center of his living room, their small figures dwarfed by the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. "It's so high up," Emma whispered, pressing her nose against the glass. "I can see everything from here." Lily nodded in agreement, then turned to Alexander with those eerily familiar green eyes. "Mommy was right. You really do live in a building that touches the clouds." Alexander's throat tightened. Every mention of their mother brought fresh waves of confusion and grief. He had spent the drive home trying to process the impossible situation, but his analytical mind, the same one that had built a billion-dollar empire, kept hitting walls of impossibility. "Are you girls hungry?" he asked, desperate to focus on something concrete he could actually help with. Both twins nodded eagerly, and Alexander realized he had no idea what 6-year-olds ate. His penthouse kitchen was stocked with expensive wines, artisanal cheeses, and ingredients for meals that required a personal chef to prepare. He opened the refrigerator, staring at its contents with the same confusion he might feel looking at ancient hieroglyphics. "What did your mother usually make for you?" he asked. "Pasta with butter and cheese," Emma said immediately, "and grilled cheese sandwiches and sometimes pancakes for special occasions. Simple foods, comfort foods." Alexander had everything he needed for pasta, and he set about boiling water and grating cheese while the twins explored the living room. Their awed gasps and excited whispers as they discovered his home theater system and library filled him with an unexpected warmth. As he cooked, Alexander's mind wandered back to the cemetery and the impossible revelations of the morning. Isabella Johnson. The name felt foreign on his tongue, even though he'd been married to Isabella Kane for 5 years. How could someone maintain such an elaborate double life? And more importantly, why? "Daddy?" Lily's voice interrupted his thoughts. She stood in the kitchen entrance, clutching what appeared to be a small, worn, stuffed rabbit. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." The endearment slipped out naturally, surprising him. "Why didn't you come to find us before? Mommy said you loved us very much, but we never got to see you." Alexander knelt down to her level, his heart breaking at the simple question that cut straight to the core of his confusion. "Lily, I need to tell you something very important. Until today, I didn't know you and Emma existed. Your mother never told me about you." Lily's brow furrowed in confusion, but she talked about you all the time. She showed us pictures and told us stories about how you met and fell in love. She said you got married in a big church with lots of flowers. Alexander felt the world shift again. He and Isabella had indeed been married in a large church ceremony, surrounded by hundreds of guests. It had been the society wedding of the year, photographed for magazines and talked about in all the right circles. But how could Isabella Johnson have known those details unless... "Lily, what did your mother look like?" The little girl tilted her head, as if the question was strange. "She looked like us, but grown up, same hair, same eyes. And she had a little scar right here," Lily pointed to a spot just above her left eyebrow, "from when she was a little girl and fell off her bike." Alexander's blood turned to ice. Isabella Kane had that exact scar in that exact location. She told him the story on their second date, how she'd been showing off for a boy she liked when she was 7 and ended up needing 3 stitches. The pasta water began to boil over, bringing Alexander back to the present moment. He quickly turned down the heat and added the noodles, his hands shaking as the implications crashed over him. If the woman these children knew as their mother had Isabella's memories, Isabella's scar, Isabella's knowledge of their wedding, then she wasn't just someone who happened to share his wife's name. She was Isabella. But that was impossible. Alexander had been with his wife nearly every day for 5 years. When could she have been pregnant? When could she have given birth? And how could she have hidden 2 children from him for 6 years? "Daddy, you look sick," Emma said, appearing at his side with concern written across her young face. "Are you okay?" Alexander forced a smile and added butter and cheese to the pasta. "I'm fine, just thinking. Here, let's eat, and you can tell me more about your life with your mother." They sat at his dining room table, a massive piece of polished mahogany that had hosted countless business dinners but never a family meal. The twins ate with the desperate hunger of children who had been surviving on whatever they could find for days, and Alexander found himself watching their every move, cataloguing the small details that might provide answers. Emma held her fork the same way Isabella did, with her pinky finger slightly extended. Lily had a habit of tucking her hair behind her right ear when she was thinking, another gesture he'd seen his wife make thousands of times. The similarities were too numerous to be coincidental. "Tell me about your house," Alexander said gently. "Where did you live with your mother?" "It was smaller than this," Emma said between bites. "But it was nice. We had our own room with bunk beds, and Mommy had a big bed all to herself. She said someday our daddy would come live with us, and they could share the bed again." "Again?" Alexander's pulse quickened. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Mommy said you used to sleep together every night before the bad men started looking for us. She said she missed cuddling with you and that you made the best coffee in the whole world." Alexander's coffee. Isabella Kane had teased him mercilessly about his morning coffee ritual, a complex process involving imported beans and a vintage espresso machine that had cost more than most people's cars. She claimed it was the most pretentious thing about him, but she'd also admitted it was the best coffee she'd ever tasted. "Did your mother ever show you any photos of me?" he asked. Both girls nodded eagerly, and Emma wiped her mouth with her napkin before speaking. "Lots and lots. She had a whole box of them hidden under her bed. Pictures of you in a fancy suit, pictures of you and her dancing, pictures of you at the beach making silly faces." Alexander remembered that beach vacation. They'd spent a week in the Hamptons just 6 months after their wedding, and Isabella had insisted on taking hundreds of photos despite his protests about looking ridiculous. Those photos had been in an album in their bedroom, an album he hadn't been able to look at since her death. "Where is this box now?" he asked. The twins exchanged a worried glance. "We don't know," Lily said quietly. "When the bad men came, Mommy told us to grab our emergency backpack and hide. When we came out, everything was messy and broken. We looked for the photo box, but it was gone." "What was in your emergency backpack?" Emma reached into a small, dirty canvas bag that Alexander hadn't noticed before. She pulled out a change of clothes for each of them, a few granola bars, 2 small bottles of water, and something that made Alexander's heart stop. It was a photograph of him, but not one he remembered taking. In the image, he was sleeping peacefully in what appeared to be a hospital bed, wearing a hospital gown. Isabella, his Isabella, unmistakably, sat beside the bed holding 2 tiny babies. She was smiling through exhausted tears, and the babies were clearly newborns, their little faces red and wrinkled. "Mommy said this was taken the day we were born," Emma said proudly. "She said you were so tired from staying up all night with her that you fell asleep right after we arrived." Alexander stared at the photograph with growing horror and confusion. He had never been in a hospital for childbirth. He had never seen these babies before today. But there he was, unmistakably himself, apparently present for their birth. "Emma, Lily," he said carefully, "what year were you born?" 2019, they said in unison. Alexander's mind raced. In 2019, he and Isabella had taken their anniversary trip to Europe. They'd been gone for 3 weeks, touring Italy and France. Could Isabella have somehow staged this photograph? But it looked absolutely authentic, and the exhaustion on both their faces seemed genuine. "Do you remember anything else about when you were babies?" he asked. Lily shook her head, but Emma's face lit up. "Mommy told us that right after we were born, she had to take us away, because the bad men found out about us. She said it broke her heart to leave you, but she had to protect us and protect you too." "Protect me from what?" "From the bad men who wanted to hurt your family to get your money," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Mommy said they found out she was having babies and planned to kidnap us as soon as we were born. So she pretended to be someone else and disappeared." Alexander felt pieces of an impossible puzzle slowly clicking into place. If Isabella had discovered a kidnapping plot targeting their unborn children, she might have faked her own death and assumed a new identity to protect them. But that would mean she had been alive all this time, living as Isabella Johnson while he mourned Isabella Kane. It would mean that his wife had let him believe she was dead for 6 years while she raised their children in hiding. The betrayal of it, if true, was staggering. But even as anger began to simmer in his chest, Alexander found himself understanding the terrible logic of it. If their children had been in danger, if Isabella had believed that staying away was the only way to protect them and him, then perhaps she had made the ultimate sacrifice. "Girls," he said slowly, "I need to ask you something very important. When your mother died 3 days ago, did she leave anything for me? Any letters or messages?" Both twins shook their heads, but then Lily's eyes widened. "Wait, she did say something really important right before she made us hide. She said that if anything happened to her, we should tell you about the blue box." "What blue box?" "The one hidden in the place where love began," Emma recited carefully, as if she'd memorized the phrase. "Mommy made us repeat it over and over until we got it exactly right." Alexander's breath caught. The place where love began. Isabella Kane had said those exact words on their wedding day, referring to the bench in Central Park where he'd first told her he loved her. They'd had their engagement photos taken there, and Isabella had insisted on returning to that bench every year on their anniversary. If there was a blue box hidden there, it might contain the answers he desperately needed. But as he looked at Emma and Lily, their innocent faces trusting him completely, despite having just met him, Alexander realized that the truth might be more complicated and painful than he was prepared to handle. "Daddy," Lily said softly, "are you going to keep us safe? We've been so scared without Mommy." Alexander reached across the table and took their small hands in his. "I promise you both, I will never let anyone hurt you. Whatever happened before, whatever secrets your mother kept, you're my daughters now, and I will protect you with my life." Both girls smiled, and for the first time since Isabella's death, Alexander felt a spark of purpose that had nothing to do with revenge or business success. These children needed him, and perhaps he needed them just as much. But even as he made his promise, Alexander knew that their safety depended on uncovering the truth about Isabella's double life and the people who had killed her. The blue box in Central Park might hold those answers, but retrieving it would have to wait until he could ensure the twins were secure. As if reading his thoughts, Emma yawned widely, and Lily's eyelids began to droop. The emotional trauma and physical exhaustion of the past few days were finally catching up with them. "Why don't you girls get some rest?" Alexander suggested. "We can figure everything else out tomorrow." He led them to the guest bedroom, which he quickly realized was entirely inappropriate for children. The king-sized bed was too high, the room too formal, the furniture too sharp and expensive. Everything in his penthouse had been designed for adults with sophisticated tastes, not for two little girls who needed comfort and safety. But Emma and Lily didn't seem to care. They climbed onto the massive bed together, curling up like kittens and falling asleep almost instantly. Alexander stood in the doorway watching them, these two small lives that had been thrust into his care, and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Tomorrow, he would call his head of security and begin the process of turning his penthouse into a fortress. He would contact his lawyers about establishing custody and legal guardianship. He would start the investigation into Isabella Johnson's death and the men who had killed her. But tonight, he would simply stand guard over two sleeping children who had called him Daddy and trusted him to keep them safe. As the city lights twinkled beyond the windows, Alexander made another silent promise, this time to Emma and Lily themselves. He would give them the childhood they deserved, the love they needed, and the security their mother had died trying to provide. And he would make sure that whoever had taken their mother from them would never threaten his family again. Alexander spent the night in a chair beside the guest room door, unable to sleep while the twins were vulnerable. Every small sound in the penthouse made him tense. Every shadow in the hallway could hide a threat. By morning, his neck ached and his eyes burned, but Emma and Lily had slept peacefully through the night. He woke them gently and prepared breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, food simple enough that even he couldn't mess them up. As they ate, Alexander studied their faces in the morning light, still amazed by how much they resembled Isabella. The resemblance went beyond the obvious features. It was in their expressions, their gestures, the way they tilted their heads when listening. "Daddy," Emma said between bites of toast, "when can we go get our clothes and toys from home?" Alexander's stomach clenched. He couldn't take them back to the scene of their mother's murder, and he suspected the police had already sealed it as a crime scene. If there even was a crime scene, he still didn't know where Isabella Johnson had lived or died. "What's your address, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Emma recited an address in Queens, a working-class neighborhood about an hour from Manhattan. Alexander made a mental note to have his security team investigate the location, but he doubted they'd find anything useful. If professionals had killed Isabella, they would have cleaned up thoroughly. "We can't go back there right now," he said carefully. "But we can buy you new clothes and toys today. Would you like that?" Both girls nodded enthusiastically, and Alexander realized he had no idea how to shop for children. He'd never been in a toy store or children's clothing department. His usual solution to any problem was to throw money at it, but this required something more personal. As they finished breakfast, Alexander's secure phone rang. Only a handful of people had this number, and the caller ID showed his head of security, Marcus Chen. "I need to take this call," Alexander told the twins. "Stay right here, okay?" He stepped into his study and answered the phone. "Marcus." "Boss, we've got a problem." Marcus's voice was tense. "Someone's been asking questions about you and your family, professional questions, from people who know how to stay invisible." Alexander's blood ran cold. "What kind of questions? Whether you have any children, whether your wife had any family you might turn to. They're being very careful, using intermediaries and cutouts, but our contacts in certain circles are hearing whispers." "How long has this been going on?" "Started about 4 days ago, right around the time." Marcus paused. "Boss, is there something you need to tell me? Because it sounds like someone thinks you have family you haven't mentioned." Alexander looked through the study door at Emma and Lily, who were giggling over something on the tablet he'd given them to watch cartoons. "Marcus, I need you to come to the penthouse immediately and bring Sarah." Sarah was Marcus's wife and a former social worker who now helped with the more sensitive aspects of Alexander's charitable foundation. "On our way. Should I bring the full security team?" "Not yet. We need to talk first." Alexander hung up and returned to the twins, who looked up at him with bright, trusting faces. In 30 minutes, he would have to explain to his security chief that he'd discovered 2 daughters he never knew existed, and that their mother, who may or may not have been his wife, had been murdered by unknown assailants. When Marcus and Sarah arrived, Alexander sent Emma and Lily to the living room with strict instructions not to leave his sight. Then he sat his most trusted employees down and told them everything that had happened since he'd found the twins in the cemetery. Marcus listened with the stone-faced professionalism that had made him invaluable, but Sarah's eyes filled with tears as Alexander described the children's fear and hunger. "Jesus, Alex," Marcus said when the story was finished. "This is either the most elaborate con I've ever heard, or your wife was running the deepest cover operation outside of the CIA." "It's not a con," Alexander said firmly. "I know it sounds impossible, but these children, they know things only Isabella could have told them. They have her mannerisms, her expressions, and this photograph." He handed over the hospital picture. Sarah studied the image with professional interest. "This looks authentic. The detail, the lighting, the expressions, it would be nearly impossible to fake this convincingly. And these children have clearly experienced trauma. Their body language, their hypervigilance, the way they stay close together, these are textbook signs of children who've witnessed violence." Marcus was already pulling up information on his tablet. "Isabella Johnson, Queen's address you gave me. She rented a small house under that name 6 years ago, paid cash for the lease and all utilities. No credit cards, no bank accounts, no digital footprint beyond the absolute minimum. Someone who knew how to disappear," Alexander murmured. "Or someone who had help disappearing," Marcus corrected. "This level of operational security requires resources and expertise. Your wife couldn't have done this alone." Sarah had moved to the living room doorway and was observing the twins. "Alexander, I need to ask, are you prepared for what this means? If these children are really yours, their lives have been turned upside down. They've lost their mother. They're in a completely foreign environment, and they're trusting you with everything they have left." Alexander watched as Emma helped Lily reach a book on the coffee table, the older twins' protective instincts already evident. "I know, but what choice do I have? They're my daughters." "Are they?" Marcus asked bluntly. "I mean, I believe they think they are, and I believe their mother told them you were their father." But Alex, you were with Isabella Kane almost every day for 5 years. When could she have been pregnant? When could she have given birth? Alexander had been asking himself the same questions all night. There were business trips, medical conferences she attended alone. That 3-week European vacation where she insisted on having girl time and wouldn't let me join her for the first week. You think she was giving birth during your anniversary trip? The timeline fits, and she came back from that first week looking different, tired in a way that worried me, but she said she'd been sick with food poisoning. She was more emotional too, crying at random moments. I thought it was just stress from the fertility treatments we'd been doing. Sarah returned from observing the twins. Alexander, those children have been through hell, but they're remarkably well-adjusted considering. Their mother did an excellent job raising them, which tells me she genuinely loved them and cared for their well-being. That doesn't sound like someone running a con. But it does sound like someone who made impossible sacrifices to protect her family, Marcus added quietly. Alexander felt the truth of it settling in his bones. Isabella had been alive for 6 years while he grieved her death. She had raised their children alone, in hiding, never able to contact him or let him know they existed. The loneliness she must have felt, the constant fear, the burden of keeping such enormous secrets. Boss, Marcus said gently, there's something else. The people asking questions about your family? They've been focusing on fertility clinics and adoption agencies. Someone thinks you might have children through non-traditional means, which means they might not know about Emma and Lily specifically. Yet. But if they keep digging... Alexander stood up, decision crystallizing in his mind. Then we make sure they never find out. What do we need to do to disappear 3 people? Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look. Are you talking about going into hiding? Sarah asked. If that's what it takes to keep them safe. Alex, Marcus said carefully, you're talking about walking away from a billion-dollar empire. Your company, your foundation, your entire life. Alexander looked through the doorway at Emma and Lily, who were now curled up together on the couch, sharing the tablet and whispering to each other. 6 hours ago, his life had been empty except for work and grief. Now he had something infinitely more valuable to protect. My life is in that living room, he said simply. Everything else is just business. Before anyone could respond, Emma appeared in the study doorway. Daddy? There are men in black suits outside the building. They're looking up at our windows. Alexander, Marcus, and Sarah rushed to the living room windows. 4 floors below, 3 men in dark suits stood on the sidewalk, across from Kane Tower. They weren't trying to hide their presence. In fact, they seemed to want to be seen. They're sending a message, Marcus said grimly. They know you're here, and they want you to know they know. How did they find us so fast? Alexander asked. If they've been watching you since your wife's death, they probably have surveillance on all your known locations. The question is, how much do they know about the children? As if in answer to his question, Alexander's personal cell phone rang. The number was blocked, but something told him he needed to answer. Alexander Kane. Mr. Kane. The voice was electronically distorted, impossible to identify. You have something that belongs to us. I don't know what you're talking about. 2 somethings, actually. About 6 years old, blonde hair, green eyes. Ring any bells? Alexander's blood turned to ice, but he kept his voice steady. You're mistaken. A cold laugh. Isabella Johnson thought she was clever, hiding in Queens with false papers and cash payments. But everyone makes mistakes eventually. She made hers 3 nights ago when she tried to contact you. Alexander's mind raced. Isabella Kane has been dead for 6 months. Indeed she has, but Isabella Johnson lived quite a bit longer. Until she decided that her children needed their real father more than they needed to stay hidden. Such a touching maternal instinct, such a fatal error in judgment. The caller knew about the twins. They knew about Isabella's double life, and they had killed her because she'd tried to reunite their family. "What do you want?" Alexander asked. "A trade. The children for information about what Isabella stole from us. She took something very valuable when she disappeared, something we've been looking for 6 years. The children will know where it is." Alexander looked at Emma and Lily, who were watching him with growing concern. They were so young, so innocent. What could their mother possibly have stolen that was worth 6 years of hunting and multiple murders? "And if I refuse? Then we take them anyway, and you join your wife in the cemetery. The choice is yours, Mr. Kane, but you have 24 hours to decide. We'll be in touch with delivery instructions." The line went dead, and Alexander stood frozen, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. Marcus was already on his phone, coordinating with the building's security team. Sarah had moved to the twins, speaking to them in soft, reassuring tones. But Alexander knew that no amount of security could protect them if these people were determined enough. His children, and despite all the unanswered questions, he was certain they were his children, were being hunted by killers who had already murdered their mother. And in 24 hours, he would have to choose between their lives and some mysterious item that Isabella had apparently stolen. But as he watched Emma and Lily clinging to each other, their green eyes wide with fear they didn't fully understand, Alexander realized there was no choice at all. Whatever Isabella had taken, wherever she had hidden it, he would find it, because he was not losing his family twice. The war for his children's lives had begun. The blue box sat heavy in Alexander's hands, retrieved from beneath the bench where he'd first confessed his love to Isabella 7 years ago. Marcus had insisted on a full security sweep of Central Park before allowing Alexander anywhere near the location. But the retrieval had gone smoothly, almost too smoothly. Back in the penthouse, with Emma and Lily safely in the next room under Sarah's watchful care, Alexander opened the weathered metal container with trembling fingers. Inside, he found documents that would change everything he thought he knew about his wife, his marriage, and the danger his family faced. The first item was a letter in Isabella's handwriting, dated just 3 days ago, the day she died. "My beloved Alexander," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone and our daughters have found their way to you. I pray you can forgive the deception that has kept us apart for 6 years, but everything I did was to protect them. To protect all of us." Alexander's eyes burned as he read Isabella's explanation. She had discovered during her pregnancy that Alexander's business partner and oldest friend, David Morrison, had been embezzling millions from their company. But more than that, David had been selling corporate secrets to foreign competitors and using Kane Industries as a front for money laundering operations. "When I tried to gather evidence," the letter continued, "David discovered my investigation. He threatened to kill you, me, and our unborn children unless I disappeared forever. He said he would make it look like an accident, that no one would ever suspect him. I'd already compiled enough evidence to destroy him, but I needed time to figure out how to expose him without getting us all killed." Alexander's hands shook as he read further. Isabella had faked her death with the help of a friend from medical school, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had provided false medical records and death certificates. She'd given birth to the twins in a private clinic, with Elena delivering the babies and helping establish Isabella's new identity as Isabella Johnson. "I took copies of all David's financial records," the letter explained. "Bank account numbers, transaction logs, communication with his foreign contacts, everything needed to prove his crimes. I hid it all, planning to find the right moment to expose him and come home to you, but David has been hunting for me ever since, using private investigators and worse to track down what he calls his insurance policy." The remaining documents in the box were the evidence Isabella had died protecting, Detailed financial records showing David Morrison's theft of over $50 million from Kane Industries, along with proof of his connections to several international criminal organizations. Alexander felt sick as he reviewed transaction after transaction that bore his business partner's authorization codes. David had been stealing from him for years, using his trusted position to gut the company from within. And when Isabella had discovered the truth, David had essentially forced her to choose between exposing him and protecting her family. She had chosen her family, accepting 6 years of exile and loneliness rather than risk their lives. But now David knew the children existed, which meant he also knew they might have access to the evidence that could destroy him. The phone call, the men in black suits, the ultimatum. It was all David's attempt to retrieve the documents and eliminate the only witnesses to his crimes. Alexander reached for his phone, but Marcus appeared in the doorway before he could dial. "Boss, we've got movement. David Morrison just arrived in the building. He's coming up in the executive elevator." Alexander's blood turned to ice. David had access to the executive elevator because Alexander had given it to him years ago, back when they were genuine partners and friends. Now that access was being used to threaten his children. "Get the girls out of here," Alexander ordered, shoving the evidence back into the blue box. "Take them to the safe house in Connecticut. Leave now." "What about you?" Marcus asked. "I'm ending this." Alexander pulled out his personal phone and started recording a video message. If David was coming here to kill him, Alexander wanted insurance that the truth would survive, even if he didn't. In the living room, Emma and Lily looked up as Sarah hurriedly gathered their few belongings. "Daddy, what's happening?" Emma asked, fear creeping into her voice. Alexander knelt down and pulled both girls into a fierce hug. "Remember how I promised to keep you safe? Well, there's a bad man coming here. Someone who hurt your mother. Sarah and Marcus are going to take you somewhere he can't find you." "We don't want to leave you," Lily said, tears starting to flow. "I know, sweetheart, but this is how I protect you. I'm going to make sure this bad man can never hurt our family again." Both girls clung to him, and Alexander felt his heart breaking. He had just found his daughters, and now he might lose them forever. But if David was desperate enough to come here personally, it meant he was out of options. And desperate men made mistakes. The elevator chimed, announcing David's arrival. Alexander kissed both girls on the forehead. "Go with Sarah. I love you both so much." As Marcus and Sarah ushered the twins toward the service elevator, Alexander positioned himself in the center of his living room, the blue box on the coffee table in front of him. The video was still recording on his phone, capturing everything for posterity. David Morrison entered the penthouse with 2 armed men, his familiar face twisted with an expression Alexander had never seen before. Cold calculation mixed with desperate fury. "Hello, Alex." David's voice was steady, but his eyes were wild. "I see you found Isabella's little treasure box." "Hello, David. Or should I say, hello to the man who murdered my wife and terrorized my children." David smiled, expression devoid of warmth. "Isabella made her choice when she decided to steal from me. She could have stayed dead, and everyone would have been happy. But maternal instinct is such a weakness, don't you think? You've been stealing from our company for years." "Our company?" David laughed. "Alex, I built half of Kane Industries. I deserved more than the junior partner percentage you were paying me. I simply took what should have been mine." Alexander kept his expression calm, knowing the phone was capturing every word. "And when Isabella discovered your theft, you forced her to fake her own death rather than expose you. I gave her a choice: disappear or watch her family die. She chose wisely, initially. It's a shame she lost her nerve at the end." "She didn't lose her nerve. She decided her children deserved to know their father." David's facade cracked slightly. "Those children are a liability, Alex. They know too much. They've seen too much, and that evidence their mother collected could send me to prison for life. So you killed her for it. I killed her because she tried to contact you. My people have been monitoring all your communications for months, waiting for her to make exactly that mistake. When she finally reached out, David shrugged. Well, children shouldn't have to watch their mother die, but she made that choice for them. Alexander felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. Every word David spoke was being recorded, providing evidence that would ensure justice for Isabella. "Where are they, Alex?" David asked. "Where are my nieces?" The casual possessiveness in David's voice made Alexander's skin crawl. "They're somewhere you'll never find them." "I don't think so." David nodded to his men, who raised their weapons. "You see, I know you too well, Alex. You're going to tell me where they are, and you're going to give me that evidence, because the alternative is watching everyone you care about die." "The evidence is already with the FBI," Alexander lied smoothly. "I uploaded copies to secure servers the moment I opened the box." David's eyes narrowed. "I don't believe you." "Then you're going to prison for murder, theft, and treason. The only question is whether you're stupid enough to add my murder to the list." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across David's face. Then his expression hardened with resolve. "You always were too trusting, Alex, too willing to see the best in people." David raised his own weapon. "It's a weakness that's going to get you killed." But as David's finger tightened on the trigger, the penthouse filled with the sound of shattering glass and tactical teams pouring through the windows. "FBI, nobody move!" Alexander had one last ace to play. Marcus hadn't just taken the girls to safety. He'd also called in every favor owed to Alexander's security company, including friends in federal law enforcement who had been investigating David's international connections for months. As David and his men were surrounded and disarmed, Alexander realized that Isabella's sacrifice had not been in vain. The evidence she had died protecting would finally bring David to justice, and Emma and Lily would be safe from the man who had terrorized their family for 6 years. But even as federal agents led David away in handcuffs, Alexander knew the real work was just beginning. He had 2 daughters to raise, a relationship to rebuild from nothing, and a lifetime of making up for the years they had lost. 3 weeks later, Alexander sat in the family room of his Connecticut estate, watching Emma and Lily play with building blocks on the carpet. The penthouse had been too exposed, too filled with memories of danger and deception. This house, with its wide lawns and multiple security perimeters, felt like the fresh start they all needed. The twins had adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience, though they still sometimes woke up crying for their mother. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Isabella's friend who had helped fake her death, had become a regular visitor, serving as both family physician and grief counselor. She helped the girls process their trauma while sharing stories about their mother that filled in gaps in Alexander's understanding. "Isabella never stopped loving you," Elena had told him during one of their sessions. "Every day she was away was agony for her. She used to say that the hardest part wasn't living in hiding, it was knowing you were grieving for her while she was still alive." The legal proceedings against David Morrison were moving forward quickly. His crimes extended far beyond theft from Kane Industries. Federal investigators had uncovered evidence of arms dealing, human trafficking, and connections to terrorist organizations. David would spend the rest of his life in prison, ensuring he could never threaten Alexander's family again. But Alexander's greatest challenge wasn't legal or financial. It was learning to be a father to 2 little girls who barely knew him. "Daddy," Emma said, looking up from her blocks. "Can we call you Alex instead? Daddy feels weird when we don't really know you yet." The honesty of it hit Alexander like a physical blow, but he appreciated Emma's directness. "You can call me whatever feels comfortable, sweetheart. We have time to figure everything out." Lily abandoned her building project and climbed onto the couch beside him. Mommy used to say that love isn't about how long you've known someone. She said it's about choosing to care for someone even when it's hard. Alexander wrapped his arm around Lily, marveling at the wisdom in her 6-year-old words. Your mother was a very smart woman. She was also very sad sometimes, Emma added, joining them on the couch, especially at night when she thought we were sleeping. She used to look at your pictures and cry. Alexander felt tears stinging his own eyes. Isabella had sacrificed everything to protect their family, accepting a lifetime of loneliness and separation rather than risk their safety. The magnitude of her love and the cost of her protection was almost overwhelming. I wish I could have saved her, he said quietly. You did save her, Lily said with the simple certainty of a child. Mommy said that knowing we had a daddy who would love us no matter what was what kept her going. She said you were her hero, even when you didn't know we existed. Over the following weeks, Alexander began to see Isabella in their daughter's mannerisms and expressions. Emma had inherited her mother's fierce protectiveness, always watching out for Lily and checking to make sure Alexander was okay. Lily had Isabella's gentle empathy, seeming to sense when others were sad or worried and offering comfort in her quiet way. They were extraordinary children, raised by an extraordinary woman who had somehow managed to give them stability and love, even while living in constant fear. Dr. Rodriguez had explained that Isabella had homeschooled the twins, teaching them not just academic subjects, but practical skills like how to stay hidden, how to recognize danger, and how to survive on their own if necessary. It broke Alexander's heart to think of 6-year-old children learning such things, but he also admired Isabella's determination to prepare them for any possibility. Their mother made sure they would survive, Eleanor had said. Now it's your job to make sure they can thrive. Alexander threw himself into that job with the same intensity he had once reserved for business. He hired child psychologists, educational specialists, and play therapists. He converted an entire wing of the Connecticut house into a child-friendly space, with bedrooms designed specifically for Emma and Lily, a playroom that rivaled any toy store, and a classroom where they could continue their education at their own pace. But more importantly, he spent time with them. He learned that Emma loved puzzles and strategy games, often beating him at chess, despite being only 6 years old. He discovered that Lily had inherited Isabella's artistic talents, creating beautiful drawings that covered his refrigerator and office walls. They had family movie nights and cooking disasters and long walks around the estate where the girls could run freely without fear. Alexander taught them to ride bikes and helped them plant a garden in memory of their mother. Slowly, carefully, they began to build the relationships that should have existed from birth. One evening, as Alexander was reading bedtime stories, Emma looked up at him with serious green eyes. "Alex," she said. They had settled on using his first name until Daddy felt natural to all of them. "Do you think Mommy would be proud of how we're doing?" Alexander set down the book and considered the question carefully. "I think your mother would be amazed by how brave and strong you both are, and I think she would be happy that we found each other." "Even though it took so long?" Lily asked. "Especially because it took so long," Alexander said. "Your mother spent 6 years making sure you would be safe and loved. Everything she did was so that someday we could be a family." Both girls nodded solemnly, and Alexander realized that they understood, in their own way, the magnitude of their mother's sacrifice. As the weeks turned into months, Alexander began to see healing in all of them. The nightmares became less frequent. The girls' laughter came more easily, and Alexander discovered that the empty spaces in his heart, carved out by Isabella's death, were slowly being filled by the love of the daughters she had given him. He also made changes to Kane Industries, establishing new oversight procedures and security measures to prevent anyone from ever again using his company for criminal purposes. He created a foundation in Isabella's memory, focused on protecting families threatened by domestic violence and providing resources for single mothers raising children in difficult circumstances. But his greatest accomplishment was simpler and more personal, learning to be the father Emma and Lily deserved and allowing them to teach him how to be part of a family again. On a sunny afternoon in spring, 6 months after finding them in the cemetery, Alexander was pushing the girls on swings in their backyard when Lily called out to him. "Alex, we have something to tell you." Both girls jumped off their swings and ran to him, their faces bright with excitement. "We talked about it," Emma said breathlessly, "and we decided we're ready." "Ready for what?" Alexander asked. "Ready to call you Daddy," Lily announced, "because you're not just Alex anymore. You're our daddy who keeps us safe and reads us stories and makes really bad pancakes." Alexander knelt down as both girls threw their arms around him, and for the first time since Isabella's death, he felt truly whole. "I love you both so much," he whispered into their hair. "We love you too, Daddy," they said in unison. As they hugged in the sunshine, Alexander knew that Isabella's greatest gift to him hadn't been the evidence that brought David to justice. It had been these two extraordinary little girls who had taught him that love could survive any deception, any separation, any loss. Their family had been broken by secrets and tragedy, but it had been rebuilt with truth and love. And that was a legacy worthy of Isabella's sacrifice. 1 year later, Alexander stood in the same cemetery where he had first met Emma and Lily, but this time the visit felt different. The girls, now 7 and more confident in their place in the world, each carried a small bouquet of white lilies, their mother's favorite flowers. "We want to tell Mommy about school," Emma announced as they approached Isabella Johnson's grave. Alexander had arranged for a new headstone, one that acknowledged both of Isabella's identities. Isabella Marie Kane Johnson, beloved wife and mother, her love transcends all boundaries. Lily knelt beside the grave and began speaking in the matter-of-fact way children used when discussing important things. "Hi, Mommy. We're in 2nd grade now, and Daddy, comes to all our school events. He's really bad at the parent relay race, but he tries really hard." Alexander smiled, remembering the previous week's field day where his competitive business instincts had led to a spectacular failure in the 3-legged race. Emma and Lily had laughed so hard they'd fallen over, and Alexander had realized that being an imperfect father was perfectly fine as long as he was a present one. "And Daddy bought us a dog," Emma continued. "Her name is Bella, like you, and she sleeps on our beds, even though Daddy says she's not supposed to. But he sneaks her treats when he thinks we're not looking. Tell her about the surprise," Lily whispered loudly. Emma's face lit up. "Oh, and we're getting a new mummy soon. Her name is Dr. Sarah, and she used to work with Daddy, but now she works with kids like us. She's really nice, and she knew you were the best mummy ever before she even met us." Alexander felt his chest tighten with emotion. His relationship with Sarah Chen, Marcus's sister, and a child psychologist who had been working with the family, had developed slowly and carefully. Sarah understood the complexity of their situation and had never tried to replace Isabella in the girls' hearts. Instead, she had helped them understand that loving someone new didn't diminish their love for their mother. "She makes really good pancakes," Lily added. "Way better than Daddy's, but don't tell him we said that." Alexander laughed softly. "I think your mother would be very happy that you're going to have someone who loves you as much as Sarah does." The girls had been the ones to suggest that Sarah move in with them, and they had been actively involved in planning the small wedding that would take place next month. They had insisted on being flower girls, and Emma had appointed herself in charge of making sure Alexander didn't mess up the important parts. As they sat by Isabella's grave, Alexander reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. The investigation into David Morrison's crimes had revealed the full scope of his criminal network, leading to arrests and prosecutions across 3 countries. The man who had terrorized their family for 6 years would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Kane Industries had emerged stronger from the scandal, with new leadership and oversight that ensured nothing like David's betrayal could happen again. Alexander had stepped back from day-to-day operations, focusing instead on the family foundation and spending time with Emma and Lily. But the most remarkable transformation was in the girls themselves. Under the care of loving adults and with the security of knowing they were safe, Emma and Lily had blossomed into confident, happy children. They excelled in school, made friends easily, and showed no lasting trauma from their early years of hiding and fear. They still missed their mother. Alexander doubted that pain would ever fully disappear, but they had learned to honor her memory while embracing their new life. "Daddy," Emma said, interrupting his thoughts, "can we tell you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." Both girls looked at each other with the conspiratorial expression they wore when planning surprises. "We've been thinking about Mommy's letter." Alexander's heart skipped. 6 months ago, he had finally shared Isabella's letter with the twins, reading them the parts that were appropriate for children their age. They had been fascinated by their mother's words and had asked to hear certain passages read aloud many times. "What about the letter?" he asked. "The part where she said she hoped you could forgive her," Lily said seriously. "We don't think there's anything to forgive." Emma nodded in agreement. "Mommy saved all of us. She saved you from the bad man. She saved us by teaching us how to be strong. And she saved other families by making sure the bad man got caught. Heroes don't need to be forgiven for being heroes," Lily added, with the wisdom that continued to amaze Alexander. As the afternoon sun filtered through the cemetery trees, Alexander gathered his daughters close and felt the last pieces of his broken heart finally heal. Isabella's love had saved them all, not just from David's threats, but from the emptiness that had consumed Alexander after her apparent death. "I think your mother would be very proud of the young ladies you're becoming," he said softly. "And I think she'd be proud of the daddy you became too," Emma replied. As they prepared to leave the cemetery, Lily turned back to her mother's grave one last time. "We'll see you next month, Mommy, at the wedding, Mommy. Sarah says people we love are always with us in our hearts, so we know you'll be there." Walking back to their car, with Emma and Lily chattering about wedding plans and flower arrangements, Alexander felt a profound sense of peace. Isabella's sacrifice had seemed like an ending when he'd first learned the truth, but it had actually been a beginning. The start of a family built on love, truth, and the unbreakable bonds that connected them all. The cemetery gates closed behind them as they drove toward home, towards Sarah, who was waiting with dinner, and Bella, the dog who would try to steal food from their plates. Toward homework time and bedtime stories, and all the ordinary miracles that made up a family's life. Isabella's love story hadn't ended with her death. It had transformed into something larger, a legacy of protection and sacrifice that would guide Emma and Lily throughout their lives, and a love that had brought together a new family from the ashes of tragedy. As Alexander looked in the rearview mirror at his daughters, he knew that wherever Isabella was, she was at peace. Her greatest wish, that her children would be safe and loved, had finally come true. The little girls who had once cried alone in a cemetery were now confident, happy children who knew they were cherished. The broken billionaire who had lost everything was now a father who had found his purpose. And the love story that had begun 7 years ago with a chance meeting in Central Park would continue for generations, carried forward by two extraordinary little girls who had learned that love was the strongest force in the universe. Isabella's greatest secret had become Alexander's greatest blessing, and their family, forged through tragedy and triumph, would stand as a testament to the power of love to overcome any obstacle. The twins were right. Heroes didn't need forgiveness. They deserved celebration for the love they left behind.